So our special guest today is a philosopher and negative psychoanalyst, Julie Reshe. Good afternoon, Professor Reshe. I
Good
guess
afternoon.
I guess it's 2 p.m. there. And a very warm welcome to everyone attending this discussion from different parts of the world. Julie Reshe is a Ukrainian-born philosopher, a practicing negative psychoanalyst, and a public intellectual. She's currently visiting professor at University College Cork and University College Dublin. She's also director of the Institute of Psychoanalysis at the Globe Center for Advanced Studies. It's such a pleasure to finally have you here on the screen, Professor Reshe.
Thank you.
And thank you for thank you for agreeing to this interview immediately. To such an amazing surprise. So in our discussion today on negative psychoanalysis, we will try to locate the essence of Julie Reshe's fabulous book, Negative Psychoanalysis. And if you have any questions, please write them down in the chat box. They will be taken up towards the end of the session. So without any delay, my first question to you, Professor Reshe, is let's say to begin, you are connecting everything, including the foundations of life and living, to our inner dark matter and death. So are you suggesting that being part of this blackness of pain and loneliness, we have lost our uniqueness and sense of self? So sharing grief is definitely positive. However, if notions of negativity initiate it, how do we begin?
Yeah, the way you beautifully put it, that I'm connecting everything to the inner dark matter and death. I really do this, and I think that so I perceive this blackness of pain and death as a foundation of everything, of individuality, society, and nature. And this perspective, it offers a view opposite to conventional one. So conventional one would claim that at the core of who we are, at the core of our subjectivity of sociality and of nature, there is some harmony or something opposite of pain, something opposite of death, maybe happiness. So positive things. And if you really look deep inside within us, we will discover this. Conventional outlook would say we'll discover this happiness or harmony. And I was trying to proceed from the opposite rather perspective, that if we genuinely look within who we are, within a social bond, what we'll discover is the negative stuff, that is destruction, death, absurdity, and pains of the dark matter. So there is no foundation of harmony, that it's just an illusion. And you can call this perspective depressive insight, something like that, that I was trying to develop in the book. And this perspective doesn't offer anything, any answer to the question of what to do. So it's not that there was harmony once before, or we can reestablish it in the future, harmony or happiness or any positive things. It's just that it's not what I was trying to do, not to restore anything and not to criticize even, well, a little bit maybe. But this is the negative perspective that I was trying to develop. The perspective that I think one discovers when they are depressed, and depression can be seen as when illusions stop working. And I was trying not to escape from this perspective, just stay with it and try if what will follow. And the book followed out of it.
Right. So somewhere in the beginning of your book, you have compared psychoanalysis and religion. So religion offers salvation, you say, and psychoanalysis earthly well-being, to quote from your book. So isn't this somewhat reductive? You know, how much of psychoanalysis is really accessible to people who can't afford therapies? You know, most people in the third world right now, will have no understanding of what we are discussing right now here. So I believe if psychoanalysis must replace religion with the purpose of making lives healthier, it should be every citizen's uncontested right and part of their free health benefits. So what are your comments on these?
Yeah, it is questionable. I do compare, not only me, psychoanalysis or psychotherapy in general, even psychotherapeutic society, with the religious society, with the religion, precisely with their function of salvation. It is questionable comparison because, as we know, Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, didn't like religion, and he was precisely criticizing religion for offering the illusion of salvation, afterlife, some kind of, and what he was offering instead is a more moderate, more modest kind of salvation, which is just make everyday pain, make everyday life less painful. But what I question maybe is, and within the still function of salvation. So what religion offers and what a psychoanalysis or psychotherapy, talk therapies offer in general is maybe more modest, maybe in this life, in earthly life, but still a salvation. And the negative psychoanalysis, or psychoanalysis that would follow from late Freud who got disillusioned in psychoanalytic cure, is that we cannot be saved, or well, the psychoanalysis, the way it initially what it's supposed to do, it doesn't work that way. So the psychoanalysis I'm interested in is psychoanalysis that is not saving anyone, psychoanalysis that would follow from this insight of late Freud, which is the opposite of even very modest salvation. And it's not trying, and I'm wondering if even such thing is possible, because it's a psychoanalysis that contradicts itself, its original intention maybe. And I'm exploring a space, and I think it's a space of negativity or self-contradiction of psychoanalysis, even suicide of psychoanalysis, the way it's initially supposed to function with this, according to the function of saving lives, or improving lives. And I'm wondering what it's possible to do, what kind of practice is possible within this space of not trying to improve human lives, or not trying to save, not maybe improve, it's okay, but not trying to save anyone. And it's, of course, this practice might be more accessible to anyone, because I also claim, if it's this dark matter, the way you call it, maybe I call it this way too, if it's a heart of our human connection, it's by definition accessible to anyone. It's a genuine human connection. And we also know that we can only share what we call traumas, or the fact that the realization of something opposite to positive illusion, the realization that we cannot be saved, for example, there is no cure with only close friends. Like this level of negativity you can allow with someone really close.
Yeah. Right. So why are you assigning negative connotations to the new post-traumatic person, let's say? So psychoanalytically, how does one treat this new emergent who faces crisis of reintegration back in society?
So I think it's not only new post-traumatic person who is post-traumatic, it's new, it's very old, it's as old as person themselves. And also this dark matter at the heart, or negativity at the heart of this kind of perspective, it presupposes that we are never actually integrated in a society. So there cannot be integration. There might be illusion of integration that we are maintaining within a society, more or less successfully. And trauma is always the trauma that we encounter in life from this perspective is also always secondary trauma, but just reminds us of a primary trauma. But so this kind of integration never existed. And talking about reintegration, I would rather talk about maintaining the illusion of integration, which I think we are currently losing, even the illusion. And this is what is traumatic. And we have hope that it used to exist in a past. But I think it never existed. It's only functioned. There was a possibility of this positive illusion of harmony within society and illusion of being integrated in a society that we are now not able to maintain. It's like Lacan's idea that sexual relationship doesn't exist and just expanding it to any relationship. They don't really exist. There is this destruction, the opposite of connectivity. That is at the basis of connectivity, the rupture between us and within us. And paradoxically, through this rupture, we are at the same time connected, not through actually being connected, but through the rupture of connection, which is a paradox. So what I'm trying to do is not rather reintegrate or help reintegrate people who are traumatized, but rather, and not try, instead of trying to maintain the positive illusion, because I think that we are less and less able to do so, less and less naive, we can say, in secular society, and because of how life is, and because we are all so smart for different reasons. I'm trying to explore what is possible to do, how it's possible to exist without this illusion, without what else to be done, if we all suddenly would realize, be too depressed to maintain any illusions of possibility of coherency and integration, and or even any kind of relationship that are not problematic. What is else there to be done? So it's kind of probably depressive society, but we are depressive anyways. We can just alternatively, instead of trying to run away, explore what are our options if it's impossible to escape, just in case.
Right. So borrowing from Marxist psychoanalyst Anne Barker, whom I had the good fortune of interviewing as well. So understanding of psychoanalysis, his understanding of psychoanalysis. So do you also see this bent towards healing and reconstruction and fixing a subject, as they say, as part of the capitalist trope of maintaining a stable and continuous manual labor force?
I have much respect for critical psychoanalysis and their developments in critical therapy, precisely Jan Parker contemporary developments, and critical psychology in general. And I do agree with the criticism of conventional, or the way it's called, conformist psychology, that how it services capitalism and culture of individualization when we are separated from each other, or separated from each other. And I do respect their aim to protect psychoanalysis from this conformist tendency. But what rather bothers me is not the struggle against capitalism. It's something, I think, more profound, that there is it's still, for me, critical psychology, which is much more preferable than conventional, positively oriented psychology. But there's still this mission, what drives it, it's still mission of salvation. If not individual, then society in general. And but for me, what interests me is the space where it's impossible to save neither individual nor society. It doesn't mean that that critical psychology shouldn't exist. Maybe conventional psychology shouldn't exist. I don't like it. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to improve it. It's still, all of our attempts of radical salvation are going to fail. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, but there is this process, more profound maybe, that no matter how many problems you will solve, there's going to be new problems, and there's going to be new types of suffering. It's just impossible to completely get rid of it. And that's, once you realize it, and once you get disillusioned in this both types of salvation, critical and conventional, what are other options? It's something that interests me.
Right. So bringing Malabo into the picture, why do you think all plasticity is destructive? Because you keep referring to this in your book. So what about non-traumatic changes in the brain. For example, self-realization arising out of guilt, or an epiphany in the mountains. So from the point of view of biology and neuronal plasticity, how does destruction and death function in the formation of our brain functions?
One of the goals in the book was to present, to expand Malabou's concept of destructive plasticity, which plasticity of the brain and in general plasticity as such, meaning changeability of the brain, and neurobiological plasticity and plasticity or changeability in general. So while for Malabou is just the type of plasticity, one of the type of destructive, which also means like bad, something that better not should not exist. Similarly, it works in as a concept in neurobiology as a type of plasticity, which not even really discussed. What I'm trying to do is trying to see all plasticity of the brain and general changeability through core destructivity, like showing that it's not the opposite to generation of formation. It's the rather any process of generating something or forming forms can be seen as the as a byproduct of core destructivity. So for me, from this standpoint, any changeability is the result of any transformation, any form is the result, can be seen at least as a result of destructivity operating, or we can call it trauma, because this work is traumatic. So from this point of view, you cannot say, from conventional, you could say that there is traumatic event or destructive event at the core, when at the core is destruction or trauma. And there is non-traumatic event, which is positive, completely positive, just generation, just formation without any destructivity. What I was trying to show that it's it's enough only to consider destructivity without mentioning, without even mentioning formation. Like it can be something that you don't even have to mention it, because normally, conventionally, what would be done is the opposite thing. They would just discussing plasticity, brain plasticity. They would just mention positive changes. They would not positive processes. That they would sometimes even ignore negative processes like destruction of synaptic connections, or the death of neurons, or neuroapoptosis. They would just sometimes not even mention it. I'm trying to show that it's enough to discuss only destructive processes. So from this point of view, everything is destructive and everything is trauma. Maybe it's too much, of course, but as a matter of experiment, showing that this is enough, this perspective. And from this standpoint, anything that we subjectively perceive as positive experience, as no traumatic, nice thing happened to us, it's still trauma. It still touches this disruptive core because it's a change. If something changes, change presupposes the death of a previous state, the disruption of a previous state doesn't exist anymore. And presenting it to ourselves, or culturally or subjectively, as something positive is just escaping, we can say it's a secondary process of escaping the rupture, the traumaticity of it. And for some events in our culture, we have this mechanism of escaping the fact that they are traumatic. For example, marriage, right? Happy event, culturally perceived as something happy, but at the same time is the end of a certain state of existence of a human being before it. And in some cultures, I think in Ukraine, there are some old traditions where it's very similar to funerals, where there are people who come there to cry for lost youth, because it's true. So there is even the good things are, they have, we can say, this traumatic core, just we know how to escape it. And any even tiny small changes, one can claim, at least I can claim, that they are traumatic at the core. Just know how to escape this traumatic nature.
Right. So I do support your description of all destructive plasticity as incurable. So, but where do you find it lethal? What kind of lethality are you referring to? Because you mentioned that word. It's also lethal.
I use them interchangeably, not to repeat the word death too much, but ultimately, maybe what I'm trying to show is that something that we call life, it can also be seen as dying, the process of dying. So any second of life would we perceive as positive kind of process, unfoldment of life. One might show that it's also simultaneously process of engagement with death, with destructivity, precisely through these changes that are disruptive. So we do prefer to call it life, but life can also be seen as dying, as not its life operating upon us, on us, but also can be seen as death operating upon us. And it's not only, so conventionally we would think that there is the beginning of life, of individual life, and then there is the end of life. And there's something that happens at the end, and just something that is opposite to the state of being alive. And existential philosophy, for example, would show Heidegger rather the different perspective where there is this death operating not only as a limit, not only something that operates throughout all the process of us being alive, but we can add to this that life is can be seen. It's not only death at the end; it's also when you're losing everything. There are lots of dimension of things that come to an end, and that are already from the beginning approaching the end, such as other people in our life, or our certain age that we're losing, or certain of qualities that we have, or even any possessions that we have. It's not forever. It's something that we're going to lose. And our subjectivity, what we define through other people, which is self as interrelational, through our possessions, it's also always it's the collection of series of deaths, which we prefer to call life, but it can only be presented as the lethal process, as the ending process, something that is approaching its end and defined by its end already. So death is there. It's multidimensional.
Right. So when you borrow from Lacan and talk of subject as a second subject, or a bad subject, or the zero level form of subjectivity as a pure subject of death drive, are you trying to reiterate that the entry of the subject within the symbolic order itself is the original traumatic event itself? So if that is true, how must we distinguish between this primal trauma on the one hand and Malabou's traumatic event that results in destructive plasticity of the brain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do talk a lot, maybe, and I borrow Lacan's understanding of subject that is initially post-traumatic, meaning the psychoanalytic comprehension of a subject as something that is born out of trauma. It's not trauma that we encounter, but trauma is at the beginning of us. Our beginning of who we are, of ourselves, is trauma. We are born trauma, our mother. And therefore, any trauma that we would encounter from later in life, from this position, is just traumatic because it's not by itself, but because it reminds us of this initial of trauma that is at the basis of us. We can say that we are kind of non-existent at the basis. There is no us, and any rupture that when we're not able to maintain the protective illusion of coherency, illusion that we are not this rupture or nothingness at the core, whatever disrupts it in the certain events of life, we just feel we're coming back, we're falling back to the initial trauma of nothingness that we are. And except for with Lacan, trauma for him would be connected to the entrance of into a symbolic order. For me, I'm not that interested in symbolic order and anything post-structuralist, anything that has to do with language that much, at least from this perspective. It just trauma, not of symbolic order, just trauma as such, more maybe not symbolic, but existential or ontological trauma. And also I'm trying to think Malabou's idea of rethink her idea of destructive plasticity and traumatic events of operation through which destructive plasticity operates, also as more ontological. So connecting it with this expanded version of Lacan. It just nothing else operates on us except for the destructive plasticity and the trauma.
Right. Right. So one of my favorite parts in your book is when you write, and I quote, the very style of academic writing requires speaking from the place of positive normality, unquote. So are you suggesting that all writing is fundamentally a product of traumatic minds, or therefore subjective? So borrowing from Beckett, does all writing constitute attempts to sublimate one's traumatic past? In fact, the book you have written, is it also a channeling out, venting out of your own personal trauma, perhaps? It's academic writing.
Yeah, that's even more. I think that not only writing books, but especially writing books, is the trauma response. For me, just everything is the trauma response. So at least we can perceive it that way and see what will follow. But including writing books and maybe writing and even language as such can be seen as an attempt to escape maybe trauma. But with academic books, it's interesting because you have to pretend it's also not only trauma response, not only a result of trauma, of a traumatic mind, but also attempt to escape it. And with academic books, it's interesting because there are certain requirements. You need to pretend to be normal to certain, not crazy, to certain extent. There are different rules to follow. There are different requirements. You're supposed to have the book's supposed to have a certain impact, certain format, like it's hidden deep inside with that. You have to hide deep inside that you are not traumatized. Present yourself and talk about other traumatized people, not about yourself. My book, I think it's different because I would agree with Beckett that the writing is attempt to sublimate trauma. I was trying to do the opposite. I was trying to not to sublimate it, just to write within the space of trauma without trying to make it better, maybe only make it worse. Of course, it was a questionable choice, but this is how this book is different. It doesn't conceal. Writing that doesn't attempt to conceal trauma, it's just elaborate on it. So it's not that I'm pretending to be mentally stable in this book, but at least I'm trying to. And it's very problematic because the language itself, especially academic language, it's like works in the opposite direction. You really want to write what to do, what follows from it, how useful is this, that would justify the very existence of this book and of you writing. So, and maybe I failed because if the book has a certain structure and it was published, it was accepted, it is a failure of this idea. But at least there's, at least I tried to not to do it.
Right. So of course, you support Malabou's and Zizek's standpoint about a new self that is formed after the traumatic event, existing in discontinuity with her past narrative. So however, how many changes could possibly be perceived by us? So will more traumatic encounters mean more changes in one's subjectivity? Will there be more ruptures with her past? So is it then possible to imagine a stable subject at all? So I mean stable from the psychoanalytic point of view, how many subjectivities within one subject could be possibly imagined?
From this negative point of view, there is no stable self. like there is no stability, there is only an illusion of self, and there is no even self, I would say. It just is something, self, what we call self, individual self, is the point of interconnectivity with other self. So self doesn't exist as something separate. It just the fact that it's separate is just illusion, but also it's not stable. It's not just one self, because of this rupture at the heart of a subject. And the problem that Malabou points at in her work, and which I also think it's a very important one, is that it might be too much of these ruptures or traumatic event that we stop feeling it. And for her, example was her grandmother who suffers from Alzheimer's. Like, she's not, when it's too much suffering, we are not able to feel maybe even suffering. And it's like a completely different level of suffering. It's not the opposite. It's not the state of bliss, the way we sometimes prefer to think that if you just numb, psychologically, it's not suffering, it's a bliss. It's better to think of it as a form of suffering too, or form of suffering when suffering is not possible. I would claim that it's not too many ruptures, that it's, again, this illusion of coherency of self. We are not able to maintain it, and it's for various reasons. And this is what probably becoming more and more sensitive to this rupture within us, and the absence of a stable self, or the meaning of life, or something like that. And I would maybe argue that it's important from this standpoint to save, if not happiness that much, the ability to feel happiness, but at least suffering, to at least to be able to not to maintain illusion, but at least to suffer, because we're now losing even the ability to suffer because of this too muchness. Maybe it's some kind of art of suffering that it's important to explore, that we will be able not to fall out into numbness. But I'll contradict myself here, because I'm offering some kind of improvement of saving suffering, because we're not able to suffer because it's too much suffering. So it is contradiction, but something to think about, that maybe instead of, if you want to improve anything, instead of saving happiness, trying to rescue happiness, maybe it's the suffering that we should pay more attention to, because it's the something we also losing. Maybe it's more important. Rare species.
Right. So are you extending Malabou's concept of destructive plasticity to only traumatic instances that result in a rupture in the subject, or life-affirming events as well? For example, an act of mercy, which alters the path, let's say, of a fraudster. So isn't this also kind of destruction of the previous self?
Mm-hmm. So again, it's when we were talking about marriage, it is a good thing, probably, but it can also be seen as problematic, as a traumatic thing, because it's a rupture from the previous stage. It's still a state of something changes, and even death can be sometimes be a good event. For example, death of Theron or something, death of Putin or something like that. But it's still traumatic, because it's change. Even if it's change for the better, it brings its own problems. It does solve a great problem, but it also brings its own problems. And the enthusiasm that we perceive that a certain death is change for the better will just might help us, probably this maintaining this illusion will help us to suffer the consequences, or to act within the consequences. But it's still traumatic change. There are not changes that, from my perspective, could be perceived as only good, positive, not traumatic changes. I think all of them can be seen as something, as the changes that have the traumatic core in them, even changes for obviously for the better.
Right. But I think the fundamental question also is, why are you choosing phrases like living deadness or a negative principle to substantiate that we are formed not by any dialectic mechanism, but by destructive plasticity? So are you merely assigning a counter to the principles of positivity forwarded by psychoanalysis?
It's just because maybe it's too much, but it's just because normally what is done is the opposite one. Normally, negativity would not be emphasized and would be seen as something unnecessary or secondary. There is a positive formation, and destructivity might be seen as a part of the positive formations, positive processes, and it's just the negative negativity is either part of more general positivity, positive project, or something unnecessary. I was trying to show the opposite, that negativity or destructivity or dying is enough to explain many things, that it's not dialectics. Because if you mention positivity, it just sounds natural, and no one would add, except for me maybe, no one would come and add, where is the negativity here? Why you're not adding it? But when we talk about negativity, it's natural that one wants to add the positive element here. We are naturally kind of aiming to see how is it's still going to end well. It's still for the better. It's still, there's the greater, larger project or positive process that it's happening. And I was trying to be faithful to the negativity and destructivity, showing that it's enough. It's like the opposites of God and devil in Christianity. Well, at least my interpretation of Christianity. It's always when there is devil, evil forces operating, we want to add God to it. Like there's still God. There is a larger this project that it's devil just helping the God, the negativity. And I was trying to show that the devil is all there is. There is no God, but it's just devil, metaphorically,
Right.
or not metaphorically.
So right. So being aware that we're all products of destructive plasticity and we are perpetually being destroyed beyond the pleasure principle, to quote from you. So how does one then survive this deadness inside, this predominantly lifeless self, which is simply quoted from outside? So I'm especially interested in the three dimensions with which you kind of end your book. You talk about immediately after stating that you want to steer away from this philosophical messianic tendency of suggesting alternatives out of our negative existence. So I'm really interested in the three dimensions you talk about.
Mm-hmm. So it's I talk about three dimensions of suffering: individual, social, and more natural, within the space of nature. Nature is something that's suffering, and I don't think so we are, I see everything as perpetually being destroyed and operating beyond the pleasure principle, or even outside, without considering any pleasure principle, any positive principle, in fact. And I don't think that we survive this deadness. Don't think we actually survive. Like there is no point of where we can say we survived, because we're still going to die. It's still any cure or any fact that we survive. It's just, again, the illusion. It's just the instance in the extending of your dying. It's there is never the stage where you survive and yay, it's ended good. It's never going to end good. It's still going to, it's just maybe moment of rest where you can maintain illusion of survival. But what happened, your death, your process of your dying, it's not you survived and you're alive. It's just the process of your dying is now extended. Yay, you're gonna die for longer. For like many more years now. So it's trying to question the very idea of possibility of cure and possibilities to survive. And it's not only on a level of individual, but also similar process on the level of society, but also on the level of nature. So it's never, it's not that nature is life and harmony, it's something opposite to destructiveness. Nature can also be seen as based as functioning through rupture. So destructively, it's for example, on the level of species which are all going to be extinct, and for various reasons, and it's impossible to prevent it. But it's impossible to extend extinction, but it still can be seen as a generally destructive process. So yeah, that's what I do.
Right. So are you suggesting that the happiness one finds in pessimism as a way of life? So I find so much of the pessimism of the philosopher E.M. Cioran and the unending confrontation with the absurd of Camus in you. So, however, I don't know how to make sense of your belief that everything is doomed anywhere, nothing ever should or will save us. And there's a line like this in your book. So I'm not trying to inculcate a sense of moral optimism here, but let us think of other theoretical branches, for example, feminism, Marxism, postcolonialism, or human rights activists, right, or environmentalists. So don't you think that their struggle is to make our lives little more livable, even externally? So I do not talk about psychological healing here, but real living conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's probably what we do, and probably something that has to be done, maybe improvements, but it's not what concerns me, at least in this book, trying to see the more profound maybe dimension where we cannot be saved, but pessimistic. And I'm not offering, not necessary to find happiness in pessimism or just be satisfied with pessimism, because happiness is something that does not interest me as a goal. I'm questioning more why there is this search for happiness, and what are we escaping when we are trying to look for happiness? What is this thing that we're trying to run away from by improving life, or by trying to look for happiness or fixing some kind of problems? I was trying to be faithful to this dimension and explore it, and showing that it's a core, might be seen as a core dimension, and any improvement are vain. Still, there is this core is always preserved, where we cannot be saved, and it can be, it is depressive. Pessimism is not depressive enough for me. It's not pessimistic enough, because it still presupposes that there is certain more rational, for example, or more adequate to reality comprehension, and it suggests a certain type of behavior, what to do, how to perceive things for the better. It's still not pessimistic enough, because it still offers some kind of a solution, or even solution of not providing solutions. And this is not what I was trying to explore. So instead of being a part of escaping into trying to fix something, save something, improve something, even very modest, on a very modest, a practical level, I was trying to see the dimension where it's all vain. But it doesn't mean that from this doesn't follow that we should stop being feminist, for example. It doesn't follow. It's even more genuine feminist, I think, if you understand that it's all in vain. That it will never result in salvation. It might, it will end, let's say, let's be optimistic here. It will end into the fact that the problem that feminism is trying to solve is going to be solved, but it will cause its own problems and its own suffering, maybe more stuff, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It's like there is this more different, profound, different layer of I don't know, things that I was trying to operate within. It doesn't contradict. It doesn't mean that phenomena that try to improve life not supposed to exist. It's just about something else.
Right. So contrary to Nietzsche's view of animals as miseryless things and humans as half animals, how do you comprehend Zaffe's conception of the brotherhood of suffering between everything alive? Because that is, again, I find something very positive, because if there is a kind of brotherhood or a kind of sorority, we're again shifting or bringing in the positive dimension into this argument, right? So how do you comprehend that?
Well, to simplify, both Nietzsche, for Nietzsche and for Zapfer in their conventional reading, for them, humans are, for Nietzsche, humans are aborted animals, not proper animals. There's something wrong with them, or sick animals. And for Zapfer, Peter Wetzel Zapfer, for him too, humans are not proper animals. They're kind of sick species, sick creatures that suffer too much, and therefore they're a mistake of nature. And I would rather argue the opposite, and Alenka Zupancic suggests, for example, different reading of Nietzsche, and one can also use similar reading of Zapfe. So it's opposite to that we are, humans are sick creatures because we suffer too much. Unlike other animals, we can claim that based on certain reading of Nietzsche and Zapfe, that not only humans suffer, but there is the suffering is universal, and this is something that we share with other animals. And this stance from Zapfe is, one could use it to support this different reading, that it's not humans that suffer too much, unlike animals who don't suffer. And there is the brotherhood and sisterhood, we can add to it, of everything alive, because it's all suffering. So it's nature, something to show that it's nature that it's suffering instead of us suffering. It might be seen as positive, brotherhood in suffering, but also it might be seen as negative because it's even worse, you know. So what if we brother it just in suffering? It just still, suffering is not reduced to humans, just all nature is suffering, and it's negative in a way that it's more suffering that I think we can discover. Then so it's kind of maybe positive because of the brotherhood, but also negative because it's much more suffering that it's just reduced to, it's not reduced to humans.
Right. So if we are continuously pretending and sacrificing to keep up the illusion of happiness and harmonious coexistence intact, then performance must have a massive role to play in our daily lives. So are you suggesting, like Schopenhauer, that all human bonds are ultimately painful and one must stop reproduction altogether? So in other words, philosophically speaking, we should not exist if we want the pain to stop.
Yeah, maybe. But it was Zapfe and anti-natalists who, Zapfe would actually suggest, because humans are a mistake of nature, they suffer too much, and they feel the brotherhood of everything in life. They should stop reproducing, stop existing, precisely because they feel too much pain. For me, it's not this solution. It's not pessimistic, depressive, and negative, we can say, enough, because it's still a solution of to stop suffering. It's still escape of something from somewhere I'm trying not to escape, not offering any solution, just be there. Zapfe stayed devoted to this negative space more than anyone else, I think, because he exposes, as a philosopher, exposes everything in culture. It's his idea that everything, all the cultural structures, including psychotherapy, are mechanism of escaping this profound negative, traumatic, doesn't call it traumatic, it's just core suffering at the core. So he analyzes everything in culture, everything human does as a mechanism of escaping. And so he recognizes the negative core, but he still offers the way of escaping, just stop existing. It's too you're not supposed to exist. It's too painful. Just stop existing, which is also a cure. Paradoxically, even if it's very pessimistic, antinatalism is pessimistic. Let's stop existing, but it's still in the name of, if not better life, it's still the absence of suffering. So it shares its intentions with psychotherapy, which is trying to cure suffering. And what I'm trying to do is not to suggest, not to escape from there, which is even worse than anti-natalist, because it means that it won't end, and you can genuinely accept the idea, the realization that it won't end, and we're not supposed to. There is nothing we're supposed to do. So
right. So I'm trying to provide a different meaning to our inherent death drive here. So if the death drive is the inner calling that compels us to come back to the state out of which we originate, the primordial non-existence, to quote from your book. So why aren't we perceiving it as some kind of transcendental unity that is grounded in timelessness? So there could be mourning, let's say, or nostalgia for a cosmic longing, anxiety. But anxiety, on the other hand, is more like a product of social encounters. So my question is, isn't it time for psychoanalysis to embrace spiritual and quantum dimensions? Why not think of death drive as a kind of return to this kind of all oneness?
I think it's the idea of the unity that was lost, and now we mourning it, of all our existence is mourning it and feeling, and through the feeling nostalgic about it, and through the anxiety we can recreate it or recreate it, or just a reminder of it, something like that. Freud pointed out that, so psychoanalysis even starts with it, that it's illusion, the grounding, basic foundational illusion that religion has, illusion as a bad thing, that we're not supposed to follow this illusion. But it is probably the fundamental quality of human mind to have this kind of perception, to hope that there is something, some profound unity that was lost, and there is something that we can do to restore it, even either through feeling of happiness or something good, or through the feeling of negative feeling of anxiety, of mourning for the something lost. What psychoanalysis would say, Lacan, for example, this idea of loss or lack that is primordial, and we only have illusion that it existed, so it's always already lost. And I'm trying to be faithful to this idea, even though I can detect, as a human being, I can detect in myself the profound longing, but I'm just trying to, with precisely this idea. And the death drive can be seen somehow as a part of the whole, this mechanism, that it's Schopenhauer's also idea that we, he is very pessimistic, but still optimistic in a way, that even though our life is suffering, subjective life is suffering, well, and life as a society is suffering too, but after death, still some kind of cosmic unity that is operating. And so it's his illusion too. I'm trying to be, and I have it as a human being, I can detect it in myself in the times of crisis especially, but I'm trying to be faithful to the psychoanalytic insight that it was never there, it's just an illusion, to maybe induce the depression. It's like lost God, it's, you need to remind yourself of God understood as the maybe Christian idea of unity of everything alive, some kind of harmony and unity at the beginning. You need to, if you want to be atheist or something, it's something you have to remind yourself. It doesn't come naturally. and what causes profound depression, loss of God, loss of the foundational fantasy. It doesn't come naturally to me. I haven't lost it completely, maybe because it's impossible even to exist with genuinely losing it completely, or talk, or connect to others through interviews, for example. But at least theoretically trying to stay with Lacan here, idea of that it was never there, meaning we'll never get back to it. It's that bad. It's just an illusion, but I do detect it as profound, maybe basic illusion. And I'm not sure what to do if it's going to be lost completely, meaning I don't think we'll be able to write books and talk to each other.
Right. So my last question is, which should have been my first question also probably. So how is your negative psychoanalysis different from let's say, a Freud or Marxist like Jacobi, or death drive affirming theorists like McGovern?
Jacobi, Freud, a Marxist, who offered term negative psychoanalysis that I'm using or overusing. But he was critical theorist following Adorno or Marcuse, summarizing their thoughts, expanding, and he's still doing it, expanding their thoughts. Negative psychoanalysis for him is critical psychoanalysis. His point, he was as critical psychologist or psychoanalyst against capitalism, and he saw he was criticizing, he's still criticizing conventional psychotherapy or conventional psychotherapy for servicing the unjust capitalistic order. And for him, negativity, including the negative emotions like anxiety and rage or something like that, the negative core that we suppressing to look happy in a capitalist society, and that conventional psychotherapy tells us to suppress and to just be happy in an unjust society. For him, one need to rescue, one need to not to suppress the negative emotions, not only negativity in this way, but including negative emotions, just to so that will be more to liberate the revolutionary spirit and to liberate our profound sociality and interconnectivity. So this negativity is needed, but for him, he reduces the need to not to suppress negativity to it serves for him the goal of conquering of fighting with capitalism. I think it's more, in my interpretation, negative psychoanalysis is more profound than that. It's not only, again, it's not something that has to exist to improve, to heal the society from capitalism, for example. It's, I think, something that coincides with the negative core of a subject as such. And it's not that we have to rescue or not to suppress this negativity. It's just rather question exploring this negativity and not escaping from it and trying to form some kind of human connections within this space of negativity. So negative psychoanalysis, understood in Freud and Marxist terms, it's just negative only for a time of when there is war against capitalism. And in my view, my negative psychoanalysis is just negative forever, as long as human exists or just in a process of their dying. And it's different from McGovern idea, even though Todd McGovern pays a lot of attention and puts death drive at the center of psychoanalysis, and he's faithful to late Freud, who places emphasis on the death drive. But McGovern doesn't talk about it. He's only interested in theory and not that much with developing negative psychoanalytic practice. And for him, still, he would talk about death drive, but in a framework of discussing enjoyment, how it contributes to the enjoyment, while for me, I'm not interested theoretically and practically maybe in enjoyment. It's I think it's important to not to mention enjoyment sometimes, especially when one discusses death, strife, or suffering, because admixing enjoyment to it, or seen as a mechanism of more general framework, within a more general framework of how enjoyment works, if you discuss death, strife, or any suffering within this framework, you're not discussing it. You still see it as a part of kind of a happy ending, or at least, if not a happy ending, some kind of relief or aimed at this relief of enjoyment. So I was trying to not to talk at all, almost, about enjoyment, and trying to see death, strife, or the negativity as actually at the center, without resulting in any enjoyment, or or even not admixing any enjoyment to it. Like, it's just pure suffering, nothing else.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Another session is open for questions. Anyone wants to ask Professor Reshe anything, you can switch on your mic and just, directly throw your question at her. I think Professor Cooper has an observation. So she writes, Beckett and the Greeks come closest to expressing similar ideas of existentialism, scream, silence, a yearning rather than redemptive or salvationist. Yes.
Where are you reading it from?
It's in the chat. You can click the chat and find it.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
The question I can see here is that what is the difference between negative psychoanalysis and nihilism? Both are pessimistic and both seem to be heading towards a profound nothingness. Is negative psychoanalysis a psychological explanation of the philosophical idea of nihilism? Can I answer this one first?
Yes, please go on. Please go on. Yeah.
So I think that they're different, even though I'm not discussing nihilism that much. But they're different precisely with negative psychoanalysis and nihilism, because nihilism, same as pessimism, as a standpoint, it offers a certain certain perception of what is the right standpoint, what is the right view on what is their how is supposed to perceive the world. And I'm not offering and just exploring, not offering what is the adequate perception that we have to have, human beings supposed to have. I'm just exploring the space of can call it depression. So there is no and in this nihilism, and both nihilism and pessimism are not pessimistic enough, because they offer some correct way of thinking. Like, now we know, more think that it's you never know, right? It's not there is no correct perception of the world. And also there is this the hint of feeling of superiority in nihilism and in pessimism, meaning that whatever you any standpoint that you accept, like you are a nihilist or a pessimist, there is a feeling, any standpoint, or the opposite, optimist, there is a feeling of superiority, like I know better than other people, now I do the right thing, and other people should do the right thing, or I'm just better than them. And this is like opposite to both nihilism and pessimism. This is where they contradict themselves. It's kind of solution or feeling of superiority that the solution or right way presupposes. And the space I'm operating from, it's neither nihilistic or pessimistic in this way. It's just space where there are no hierarchy. It's just we all pathetic. We all just losers with wrong positions ultimately. So it doesn't give you this cure of superiority, like position of nihilism over other perception, like position of nihilism or pessimism would give.
Right. I think there's one more question here from Ushri Sengupto. He asks, how is negative psychoanalysis fundamentally different from classical psychoanalysis?
Yeah, good question. I think I follow the psychoanalysis I start with discussing, and I see as the starting point of what I'm interested in is late Freud of a death drive, and trying to develop practical side, possibility of a practical practice of psychoanalysis, which would be based genuinely on this disillusion, Freud who got disillusioned in practical side of psychoanalysis, which is absurd because what follows from here that nothing practical is possible, but so it's more absurd than my negative psychoanalysis, more absurd than classical psychoanalysis, especially the practical side of psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis is theory and practice. So the classical psychoanalysis would rather build a practical psychoanalysis. It would build, which is logical, would build upon early Freud, who had belief into psychoanalytic cure with it and therapeutic aims, and not disillusioned it yet. And the whole culture of talk therapies that we now exist within with psychotherapists and psychological concept, it's partially his, not partially, but substantially his influence. And what I'm trying to build, which is a failure, which is failure at the core, because I'm trying to stay devoted, but practically, to late Freud, who realized that this cure is impossible. So space of this impossibility. In this way, it's like opposite, radically different to classical psychoanalysis, because it doesn't work. It doesn't heal, and it's not supposed to heal. It's the psychoanalysis that is glitching, something like that, meaningless and pointless, like our lives. And classical psychoanalysis would be more logical and more oriented towards cure and like in normal in general.
Right. I think there is one question from Abir Sen. Abir, will you be asking it? Switch on your audio,
Yeah,
maybe?
am
Yes.
I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Thank you so much.
So, first of all, thank you for the immensely interesting talk. It was very enlightening. I had a question. So, since human subjectivity is inherently tragic and traumatic by virtue of its birth at the behest of a primal no, that is, at the advent of the symbolic, would you say that a quest for happiness is futile, considering questing itself is a characteristic of our symbolic existence? And if so, then I want to point out that Lacan says in Seminar 11, quoting Picasso, that I did not seek, I find. And then he adds that in the religious register, the phrase is often used that you do not seek me had you not already found me. The already found is already behind, but stricken by something like oblivion. Would you say that Lacan perhaps was looking for a pre-symbolic, a sort of a biological happiness, something akin to satisfaction, in the West is just left behind in our symbolic existence? And would you say that he was somehow able to grapple with it when he was talking about jouissance? And would you also say that it is the symbolic itself that brings with it a possibility of jouissance as such, in case it deems such a space for jouissance within the symbolic order, as I think Lacan does?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for those questions. It's true that Lacan, we can read Lacan as, and we can see this in Lacan, the search of a pre-symbolic associated with happiness, like pre-natural state, natural animality, when we don't suffer yet, when the subject is as understood as symbolic entity is not born yet. But this is what Alenka Zupancic, and I follow her in this, she provides alternative reading of Lacan, that this pre-symbolic, happy, harmonious animal never existed. And you can find in Lacan, as you know, probably completely things contradict each other. So one can based on Lacan, one can also provide different reading of Lacan, that it never existed. Even maybe if personally Lacan has the urge to look for it, like maybe we all do to a certain extent, to look for the happiness before, or harmony before there. But there's also other possible reading of Lacan where he's not providing this, where he doesn't have, or he lost illusion into possibility. In a similar way to Freud, I could say, but it's in a similar way, like human way, not it's just some kind of peculiarities between those two philosophers or psychoanalysts. I think it's in each of us, we have this both sides where we believe, but sometimes we're just not able to maintain illusion, and that's when we're depressed and when we not able to go on, but we're still like back at still go on sometime. It's this the negative us and the positive us, and the negative Lacan and Freud and positive Freud. So we can't say that there was this in Lacanian psychoanalysis, the hope or the idea, theory of presymbolic happy subject, happily existing in nature. But there's also, if one wants to find it, they will find in Lacan the impossibility of, and we can claim that based on this positive perception of possibility of restoring the coherency of subject, that Lacanian psychoanalysis is aimed on to restore this presymbolic happy subject. But at the same time, the part of Lacan, the reading of Lacan and reading of Freud that I'm interested in is the one where you the practice that it's not aimed at the same, and you can develop, you can comprehend also Lacanian practices, this kind of movement, not restoring, but just not knowing what to do and hanging in the space of not knowing. And if you want to talk about Jewish sons, this is a problematic concept for me, which I don't really like that much, precisely because even if it's quite tragic, because it sees it admixes pain to every enjoyment or trauma to it shows, because it combines in itself both painful element and element of joy. But at the same time, I don't like it because it does the opposite. You cannot discuss properly suffering when you use this term, because it holds already meaning of enjoyment. So I would not use it because it's problematic in this way. It has this positive side that you cannot eradicate from it. You cannot see. It's like with masochism, but it shows a suffering, profound suffering, but it also admixes enjoyment, and it like makes it easier to bear the very subject, the very thing that it describes, because of it admixes certain level, certain type of enjoyment of suffering. But it's very hard to stay devoted to, not to escape from the realization of suffering that doesn't end into enjoyment. It's suffering as such, and that was my goal. And the concept of Jewish son just doesn't work that way, and similar way concept of masochism.
Right.
Thank you so much. Would you mind if I add another question to this?
Are we okay? Make it a short one, please.
Okay. So, what do you think? How do you think, rather, video games prey on the very ludic nature of man, or rather, what is your position on how video games can be used in the discourse of negative psychoanalysis?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. So I was talking about how video games prey on our very ludic nature, that is maybe engineered by us being desiring beings. And how do you think that negative psychoanalysis could use video games in its discourse?
Mm. Well, I don't know, but I definitely it's interesting thing to just think about. Like there's lots of dimension that I wasn't never mentioned and never discussed, that one can, it's actually terrifying, that one can expand it to many other depressive perspective, to to many other dimensions and concepts. And maybe I should do it, but maybe also I shouldn't do it. We'll definitely think about it. Thank you.
All right. I think we have one
Thank
more
you so much.
question here, which is from Vidisha. She asks, if we know we are suffering from extreme pain and trauma, why are we paying so much attention to this matrix? Is it itself probably symptomatic of a universal ailment that, let's focus on this, let's focus on our trauma? Like, is it that? What do you think about it?
Well, it's also it's problematic, the very concept of knowing. What does it mean that we know, right? Because the way I'm conceptualizing it is that we all know there is this profound knowledge in us, or the dark matter of our soul, that we are traumatized and we know it. But we just, and there is the secondary movement of escaping from this knowledge, or not realizing, or forgetting it. This forgetfulness what allows us, when we are able not to be depressed, not to be shocked, or just to use language, or to communicate with others, or to generally live or pretend that we have some kind of life. But one could also question the idea of do we know if we are forgetting it? So one can also question the very idea of knowing here, from standpoint that I was based my thoughts of, is the depressive realism, which is a psychological kind of trend that perceives depression as knowing the reality, or adequate perception of reality, meaning it's knowing, it's the realization of truth, how world is, it's depressive. Unlike conventional psychotherapy would perceive depression as a state of deviation, like thinking is too negative, we are not adequately thinking, we need to correct this into something more positive. But it's interesting to question the very idea of knowing. So what happens with us when we are happy? Do we just still know, but we forget? Because it's always possible to bring us back to the traumatic core, so to say, of who we are, to bring the knowledge back. Oh no, we were like, that was just an illusion. So how does illusion operate? If illusion is knowledge, or just escaping knowledge? It's something interesting to just restructure this kind of thinking, what is knowing and what is not knowing for the future.
Right. Do we have any other questions? Yes, Orko. A quick question about how negative psychoanalysis responds to what Malabou would call the formlessness of the death drive. If the death drive is formless, does negative psychoanalysis offer a formalization of this formless death drive?
Mm-hmm. So for Malabou, her thinking precisely shows that death drive is something that forms, is able to form forms. Very hard to say it in English properly. Something that causes formation or results in generation of forms. Unlike conventional neuroscience that would see, and even psychoanalysis, she claims, that would see destruction as the eradication of all forms, the opposite of generation of forms. So for her, there are, she still preserves, Malabou still, even though she recognizes that destructiveness of the brain, destructive processes of the brain form its own forms, for her, it's still a type of certain type of formation. It's monstrous. It's like one of the example is people who have Alzheimer's, for example. It's still operation of a certain sickness that forms its own character, forms its own human being, that transforms it. It is a form. It's not the destruction. It is a human being as a result of certain self, as a result of the being formed by the destructive plasticity. What I was trying to show is that any formation, any self, even if it's not, we don't the certain type of formation of a self, a certain type of self, of the features of self that we don't necessarily group into the category of disease or illness. It can also be seen as a product of destructive plasticity, as a product of rupture and trauma. And so we are all in this, every self is monstrous in this way. It just the secondary thing, what we call illness, and what kind of monstrosity we think is we perceive as normality, and which kind of deviation from the norm that doesn't exist we perceive as abnormality. But basically there is no substantial difference between them. It's all of them can be seen as a product of destructive plasticity, as a form formed by destructive plasticity.
Right. I think, do we have any other questions? I think the last question is from Ushri again. She asks, it is commonly said that people who are more prone to suffering from depression have a more realistic view of the world compared to others. Does negative psychoanalysis explain this in any way?
Yeah, it rather criticizes this perspective, even though I start and I develop further this standpoint of depressive realism that precisely claim that we are more realistic when we are depressed. But I would also criticize this perspective because I think that it doesn't give you in this version, depressive realism gives you a feeling of superiority, like you're more realistic, and meaning that this is, which implies that people are supposed to be more depressed, therefore more realistic. It implies a certain perspective what is better and how we're supposed to, and the certain superiority of people with depression, or like general, or just sad people. And I'm trying not to imply it, because it's still very positive, quite positive outcome of a depression. There you have, even if you're depressed, it's not that terrible, but at least you know truth. I think that it doesn't, if they want to get rid of even this kind of knowing what to do, be depressed, or being superior because you're depressed. I would like to eradicate any knowing. At least remain in a place where you don't know what to do and you're not superior. There is no, you cannot install even this positivity.
Right. We have the last question from Irene. She asked, as a caregiver of a person who is terminally ill and who lives rather than just knows terminal suffering, how can negative psychoanalysis talk back to us?
Well, it's a good question. It's from this perspective of being a caregiver of a person who is terminally ill. I would like to, well, at least my attempt is to see any person as terminally ill, right? And any care as realizing that each of us is, so to say, terminally ill. So this perspective of, this is the perspective of negative psychoanalysis. It's perspective of care, but not the perspective of cure. It's not that not an attempt to fix or save someone, but still caring without hope of salvation. Understanding that it's a vain project. It's like creating mandala, doing it for the sake for no sake at all, for no reason, but still doing it. I think it's a proper, genuine care for each other if we are not trying to fix, improve other, but just realizing that it's all for each of us is going to end bad, but we're still supposed to like take care of each other, even though it's hard. Realizing this, it's harder than when you have a hope that it's all going to end up good as a result of your actions, as a result of your care. You still have to care even if it won't help.
Right. Do we have any other questions? Okay.
No.
So just to round it off, I just have the last question. Okay, no, Mark has a question. Okay. Okay. Okay, he just gives us his best wishes. Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. Yes, yeah, I have a question. So just to round it off, so would you suggest, are you suggesting the end of therapy or conventional psychoanalysis the way we know it? Are you suggesting that it should end the way we know it conventionally? Or are you suggesting that if it has to continue, it should include the negative dimension? It should speak to its patients the way the book proposes, perhaps?
I'm rather suggesting what are the options if we are too depressed to participate in normal psychotherapy. Like, what are other options if we are too cynical, for example, or too depressed to be part of it, to be part of the culture? And to be honest, maybe it should it's better if we if there was no such dimension, but unfortunately, I think there is this dimension. There is the maybe not need, but the risk that one day we're going to end up in the dimension where we're not able to participate in normal therapy and buy the illusion that it's offering us, and what is there to be done if it doesn't work anymore. And I think it doesn't work anymore.
Right. Okay, so here we draw the line. So thank you so much, Professor Reshe, for your views on the negative and traumatic dimensions of existence. And I'm certain it has opened a new portal for many of us present here. And I hope we have such sessions with you again in the near future. And thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for being so patient and cooperative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yes.